Hey, welcome everyone. This is the Jump Search Talent Show. And today we have a really exciting guest, Nai Kanal. Um, I know our topic today is going to be navigating your career and building high performing teams in personal and professional life. So, Nai, we're super excited. I want to start this off by giving a little background on her. So Nai and I met probably a little more than 2 years ago. And I think the biggest thing that I was super impressed with was how sharp and articulate she was, and she knew her stuff. And I don't know too many CMOs that are just at that top level. And so she was always the one that I had to stay in touch with because I knew that Naya was just a top CMO player. So I am super stoked to have you on board. Little background about Naya. She's currently the CMO at MedTrainer. So she regularly authors articles and presents on marketing, healthcare tools and trends, leadership, and women in technology and parenthood topics. She is a first generation refugee, which we'll get into a little bit later. And she holds a business marketing degree from the University of Utah. She is a startup advisor and a member of the Chief Network. She is passionate about growth-driven marketing and an advocate for women in business and leadership. So with that said, want to welcome you, Nai. And yeah, let's get started
thanks,
here.
Michelle, for that great opening. I'm flattered to be on here. I think Jump Search has always been doing some really cool things, especially around Utah and kind of how you guys think about things. And I love the diversity that you bring to the table with all of it. And so thank you for having me on and thinking I have something to share with the world.
Of course. No, for sure. 2 years ago, I was thinking you are for sure somebody I want to stay in touch with. So I'm glad that our paths have continued to cross and we've stayed in touch.
I love it.
Yeah. So I want to start off. I'm curious about your background. You had told us that you were a first generation refugee, and I want to hear your story. Like, what was it like where you came from, and how did that shape your life and how you are today in both your personal and your career?
So, yeah, this is a story I probably minimize in how much I tell, just because I don't know why it always drums up a little bit of emotion. But I am a first generation refugee. I came here when I was about 21 days old. I was born in the Philippines on the way here because they wouldn't let my mom get on the plane, basically. So, yeah, that was kind of crazy. The other funny part of it was my mom knew that she had me as a baby, and the nurses brought a different baby that she was like, that is not my baby. And so then they brought me eventually. And so here I am, thank goodness that my mom knew it wasn't a different baby. And
you almost got swapped.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And so, and
that's
my
a crazy
sister likes
story.
to tell me that story. She's like, you could have still been over there in the Philippines, so you're lucky that she caught it and that, you're here today. So super thankful to be in the US. My older brothers were sponsored by an uncle here in the US during Pol Pot's era. And so my family is originally Chinese, but my grandfather migrated to Cambodia.
Uh-huh.
And then during that time frame, Pol Pot went through his genocide of getting rid of the upper class and like the Chinese and everything. And so then my family went on a journey of like fleeing to Vietnam. Vietnam didn't want them either. They ended up getting caught in the concentration camps. And then when it was all released, they ended up getting out, getting to Thailand. And then
this was your mom's
and my
experience?
Most of my families, except for me and my brother right above me. I'm the youngest.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, just living, yeah. So most of us, right, we take for granted being born in this country, and all the, for all its shortcomings, there's a lot of things that this country has to offer, and we're not yet at a point where we're fleeing, for our lives. Like it sounds like you're even just your parents, and not your distant grandparents, but your parents
Oh,
were
my
doing that
sister has
early in
crazy
their
stories of
life.
starvation, my cousins being shot. It's
Wow.
it's a lot, but we're super grateful to be here. Which, as you said, it's what drives you.
Yeah. Yeah. The motivation. And what's so it's just crazy in my mind because as Americans, most of us travel to these countries. We think exotic countries, and we traveled, and we think of it as vacation. It's fun, but for your parents and your family, that was
Yeah,
survival. It was life or death, and it was just survival. And it's amazing to see kind of the resilience. Like you guys moved here as refugees, but then you were able to become so successful in your career. Not a lot of people see that. Like, not a lot of people understand the backstory and how you went through all that in your family, because that trauma probably still exists. But to see you become so successful, it's like that's just amazing. It's truly like a rags to riches kind of story.
yeah, definitely. My mom and dad both basically worked on the assembly line their whole life here, and my mom was actually the breadwinner. But yeah, my mom worked for the same company her entire career, and I here I am.
Yeah,
I've probably jumped jobs like 5 to 10 times.
yeah. How did that shape how you viewed the world? Meaning, your mom being the breadwinner, her working as a factory line worker. Like, how did that kind of shape you as a person, and how did you take that into your career?
I think it comes from, at least in my family, and I might say Asians in general, we're raised to be very grateful for every opportunity we're given. So that was the big thing that was drilled into me, is like being grateful. In terms of my mom being the breadwinner, I think it always drove home that I can do a lot, I can be a lot, and it's okay. The goal is to make your family work and to do what's best for your family.
Yeah, yeah. It's that I'm like, this is a crazy story, but I don't want to go too deep into. But I think that everybody's childhood and just their life story really kind of shapes how they are in their career and just how they've progressed forward. So I appreciate that.
It also gives some context, right? Because a lot of times we get caught up in the minutia of the day to day, and when you think bigger picture about kind of where you came from, where your folks came from, it really gives, for me anyway, it gives a little bit more context and around purpose and what you're doing. And then, now you're a parent, looking at your children and kind of the life that you're setting up for them. I think all of that, just looking back at your parents, looking back at your grandparents, where they came from, and now looking at your children, it kind of just puts things into context, it seems. Yeah, I don't know.
We're like speechless.
You
Yeah,
didn't expect the bomb was going to drop about what happened, right? And the story.
No,
But, it's not something I tell very often. It's not always a jovial conversation.
yeah, but I appreciate you sharing. I mean, I think people need to know what's other people's background and stories. Like, we just don't hear enough of it, and especially being American, like, people talk about immigrants and this and that, and I think it's great. Like, this is such a I don't know how to say it, but it's just basically like, this is a true story of an immigrant, an immigrant story. Like, you've really came from kind of a really terrible like background and just took what you had and made something out of it. So that's
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm super fortunate.
Well, I mean, we'd love to hear, like, how does that sort of translate, your background translate into what you're doing today, and specifically for our audience, many of whom are sort of navigating these sort of turbulent, tumultuous times in terms of their career, in terms of their job search. You've been a hiring manager, so you've seen both sides. You've seen what it takes to hire folks, how to build a team. You've also seen, what it means to navigate your own career in terms of making decisions around opportunities that you pursue, jobs that you decline or you accept. So we'd kind of love to dive into that, right? Maybe starting with, what it's like to be a hiring manager, and to kind of what's the sort of the psychology behind being a hiring manager? Like, what do you look for as a hiring manager when you're looking at, a stack of resumes, or when you're interviewing a candidate? What do you look for?
For me, it's always, what is the purpose, right? I think in my life, I try to be pretty intentional. I'm not always perfect, but you work on being intentional. And so with every role, it's always, what is the purpose and the intent behind the role, and what are we trying to do with it? I just got off an actual interview, because I am hiring right now for a product marketer. And I'm always very clear of like, here are my intentions with the role. I want it to always be more than it is, but I want to also give you the clear expectations of, what are the base minimum success factors and criterias. And so when I'm looking at resumes, it's like, okay, I wrote a job description for a reason. This is who I think I need, right? It doesn't mean that might evolve and shift over time depending on the people that you bring in, but and the needs of the company. But today, the job description is kind of my North Star for the role. And so when I'm looking at resumes and things, it's like, can this person do 75, 80% of the job, right? I don't expect anyone to be a perfect fit. If that was true, like, hiring would be so easy. I could wave a magic wand and poof, I'd have someone tomorrow. But the reality is that there's never a perfect fit. And so I always come about it in the way of like, how do you allow flexibility in the type of person you're bringing on, but also suiting the needs of the goals, right? So if I'm looking for a product marketer, I'm looking for someone who's done some product marketing, or at least can write, because that's a heavy writing role oftentimes. And, with every facet of marketing or even product marketing, there are different areas that people shine and do well in. And so it's helping them understand, what is the area I really need filled today, and what are the areas I want someone to also help on? What are some of the pluses, right? So those are some of the key things. Can you do the job that I have today? Then it's the person. Hey, are you smart? Can you learn? Especially if you don't fit the bill 100%. Like for me, I have changed industries every single company I've ever been at in my entire career. I've gone from banking to print to manufacturing to automotive, right? But I've always been in a marketing role. And so if people are looking to do a pivot, right, be intentional about what kind of pivot you're willing to make or where. I'll give you a good example. At one point in my career, I was interviewing for other CMO roles, and I came across a consumer company. I applied for the role. I got interviews. Ultimately, I ended up, not getting the job, but it took me a moment to step back and realize, did I want the job? I spoke to friends in the space and realized, I just probably wasn't a good fit for the job based on where I was in my career and my expectations. They want someone who knows B2C marketing. I'm a B2B marketer, and it's probably better for me, and I'll have a better time. They'll have a better time if we found someone who is more fitted for the role, right? And so I think that's one of the big things is that, hey, sometimes there's those, other factors where they didn't want to train me on how to do B2C marketing. At a CMO level, they expected me to know how to do that, right? And I would say too, but that didn't mean that I'm not a fit, right, for other roles. And so for me, I've learned that marketing is very similar, but can be different in different industries, right? And the thing that I had to learn in different industries was usually learning a new space. And how different was that going to be, right? And so for people pivoting, what are the skill sets that you know? And what are the new things that someone's going to have to teach you? And that's going to always be that balance, right? So in other product marketing positions. I've known people who hire solution consultants into product marketing because they understand that buyer super well, right? And they already know how they think, they know their values, what drives them and motivates them. So taking them into product marketing sometimes is a fit because they already get your buyers super well, right? Or and then the other part, they might already know your product. The downside is you'll have to teach them marketing. You'll have to teach them how to write potentially. And so it's a give and take of what do you want to prioritize more?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on just, that balance between hiring for skills versus hiring for potential? How do you think about that?
I think in a hot market, people are going to focus on potential more. In a market where there's a lot of candidates, then they're going to focus on having the skills up front.
Yeah.
I think it applies to today's market because there's a lot of candidates out there. It's a tough market for candidates. So it sounds like we would be focused on more, or you would be focused more on what skills they already have. And for somebody who doesn't have all the skills, how does a candidate go marketing themselves? In terms of like if they're going to pivot or they just don't have those skills and they lack it, how can they go about getting them?
So I think there are resources. There's a lot of free resources, right? And not all of them are free, but they might be minimal in cost. If you think, for instance, you want to be in product marketing, I would start with the Product Marketing Alliance, and they have a lot of knowledge, materials, right? Become a member, understand what they want. When I was looking for a job, right, I joined the Chief Network to surround myself with other individuals who might know of other opportunities to do things, right? Like if you wanted to be in demand generation or marketing operations, and I speak from marketing because these are the things I know, right? HubSpot gives out a lot of free resources on marketing operations. So there's a lot of free content out there. And so you have to focus on how can you self-teach as much as you can for the role that you want.
So it's really that person taking it on an ownership in teaching themselves. It's not relying on the company or somebody to teach them. It's really taking that on to themselves.
Yeah, I'm always excited about candidates who are continuing to self-enrich and to do more to make themselves better, not just for this role, right? But to make themselves better in their career.
Yeah. And I think that goes to your point, Eric, about just hiring for potential. Because the people that have really great potential, what we see is they're always doing extracurricular, we call them activities, or they're learning about things outside or inside their industry. But they're constantly learning and they're trying to become better. And I think that for me is what I look for.
Yeah, it also speaks to sort of a cultural, the cultural component or consideration when you're hiring or when you're interviewing for a job. Now, how do you think about culture when you're assessing a potential candidate or new hire for your team?
I am looking at culture. I try to be upfront about the culture that we have as an organization, right? But I also have a few culture questions built in on for instance, in technology, and I asked this question just barely, in technology, we tend to move at a really fast pace. It's about the MVP. How do you get to the minimal viable product? And then you continue to iterate and build off of it, right? And so I would say in SaaS and things, that is the pace that people like to see things. They like to get to a good baseline and getting it out and working on it and then building up from there. Perfect is the enemy of great and great is the enemy of good, right? And how do you get to that kind of pace where in some industries and spaces, it's okay to be in a slower pace. My husband works in the energy space and his company moves a lot slower than I would say we move in acting things. And so that's one of those cultural shift things that I do ask questions around, right? Are you prepared for the pace at which people want to work here?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many components to culture and, pace is certainly a big part of it. When we're interviewing folks, it's, we do look for that. And some of the telltale signs that we see is just, if they're coming from a long history of more established companies, despite what they might say about being able to work in a startup, or an early stage company, frankly, they haven't done it, so they don't really know. And so that's one of the things that is relatively easy to vet. Is there any cultural components that you feel are just really nuanced, and maybe you've only discovered that after you've hired the person, that, oh, this person's not the right fit?
Yeah. And for me, and that's probably why I brought up pace. Pace is one that is kind of hard to discern
Yeah.
in an interview. And so that's why I'm usually upfront of like, here are some of the expectations, on how responsive you should be in messaging and things like that. Getting a feel for how quickly someone feels like they can produce something is also a factor. I would say, I'm trying to think of some of the other things I've done in my past that were mishires. Um, you know, uh, Startup is one of those things where if you haven't been in a startup, sometimes people really don't know what they're actually getting into and the type of work and how it's very, it's the Wild West at times, and you have to be able to roll with those punches. And so I think, if I were at a startup again, the type of people I'd hire are those who can roll with the punches and are pretty flexible, is like some of the nuanced things.
Yeah. Well, when you're assessing a candidate or interviewing a candidate for the first time, um, what are some of the signs that you're like, wow, this person really prepared? Or what are the things that come across to you as a hiring manager that are impressive when a person is first meeting you for an interview?
Um, I think it depends on which stage you're meeting them, right? Because lucky for me, I get to have recruiters like you and my corporate recruiter and things who get to vet people prior to getting to me. And so I think they do a great job of eliminating some of the surprises. But I would say if I'm doing the first interviewing straight off the bat, it's being able to at least talk about knowing what the company does. I've gone on to interviews where people have no idea what the company does. They didn't even look at the website.
Mm-hmm.
They had no idea really what role they were in. Like it almost felt like they were just applying to ensure they were getting their unemployment.
Yeah, just kind of going through the
They're just going
motions.
through the motions. And so then it was just kind of like, and they weren't prepared to answer the questions very well or in a tailored way.
Yeah, yeah, we
It
see
sounds
that.
like,
We see
yeah.
that at times.
Yeah, and I was going to say that sounds like they weren't being intentional. I mean, if you're a person that's really intentional, you're looking for people who are going to be very similar to you. And so I'd imagine that somebody who's intentional has done the research, has a list of questions to ask. They're curious, right? And they're trying to understand what the role and what the company. And so that intention is huge.
Agreed. Agreed. Right. They want the job. They don't want a job. They want this job.
Yeah, I love that. You don't want a job, you want this job. So that's key.
Have you, it's when you think about, working a candidate through the process, what are some of the things that you've done to create a great candidate experience to attract that high caliber candidate? Because oftentimes those high caliber candidates are usually um, happily employed, or maybe they just have their pick of opportunities. Like, what are some of the things that you've done to kind of, we really need to attract these folks, um, and we need to make it, we need to make ourselves attractive as far as a team, an employer, a company. Like, what are some of the things that you guys have done there?
You're talking brand here a little bit. So
Yeah.
actually, we went through a big rebrand this year at MedTrainer. And part of my thinking with that rebrand is just, are we the type of company that the employees we want to work for, right? And so are we giving them enough information on our website to tell them what are the values we want so they can self-select in or out based on our value sets? And so that was a journey of us creating some of those values and becoming more defined and intentional with the type of people we want. I would say the other part is outside of compensation and benefits, right? What is the type of company they want to be? Is it more family friendly oriented? Is it more flexibility, right? And for us, we've wanted the best talent regardless of where they are. And so remote work is okay with us, right? We're not expecting people to go back into the office. And that's the advantage that we want to play on, is that, hey, I'm okay if you're in New York and I'm okay if you're in California. We're all going to learn how to work within each other's working schedules, but it enabled us to have a bigger talent pool, right? I would say those are some of the big things that we did. Something that I work with our recruiter on is just like, we want diverse talent. So how are we showcasing and representing that too on our website and showing that we're friendly to all of that? One of the things that I haven't quite figured out how to bottle and put on our site for new candidates without telling them is that, you know, what I love about MedTrainer specifically is people can be their authentic selves. Our CEO is not the typical CEO. He has tattoos on all of his arms and he proudly shows it, you know, on calls and things. And he wears a hat. He is not always what you think of as a typical CEO, but doesn't mean he's any less effective. He is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is, showcasing the rest of the team. It's a huge selling point, right? Especially when you're thinking about if you are a candidate that's looking for your next opportunity, to the extent that you can meet other people, sort of a nice sampling of folks across the team. It'll give you a good sense of what the culture is about, the kind of people that work there, and can you see yourself working with these folks? And so it sounds like you guys integrate that pretty well into your interview process.
Yeah, we try to. But we do the other tactics too. We actually follow up with people, let them know, hey, you're moving on to the next step. We're clear about what our processes are. My recruiting team does a good job of asking, how many interviews, Nye? How long are these interviews? How many people? And so that they can share that with the candidate up front.
My gosh, there's so many folks out there right now that are just getting ghosted left and right. And I'm not talking about getting ghosted when you submit a resume. It's ghosted after you've interviewed with several folks over the course of weeks and you've been in dialogue with the hiring manager about your candidacy, and then it comes down to an automated email and then no response from anyone. It's really, the bar is set so low. So if you can just, as an employer, as a hiring manager, if you can just close the loop with the candidates out there that are applying, that would mean the world to them. And it sounds like you guys do that. So kudos to you guys. Yeah.
And that helps with your employer branding. That really helps with just the candidate experience and ultimately your employer branding, because you don't have people raving and talking about badly or poorly about the company. So an automated email is easy to set up, but it's also just even an email that's slightly customized. I think that really helps all the candidates out there.
Yeah. So now, as far as personal branding, there's a lot of folks out there that are kind of, marketing themselves. Marketing anything is foreign to them, much less marketing themselves, right? You do marketing obviously for a living. You're an executive that's leading a company and leading a team that does marketing. What are some of the things that some of these job seekers can learn from your experience in terms of marketing themselves? Because it's sort of a mind shift. You have engineers out there that they don't think about marketing. You have folks that have nothing to do with marketing, but now they're being asked to market themselves. It's very foreign to them. But what are your thoughts there? How can some of these folks learn from some of your experience?
Even as a marketer, someone had to once say to me, Nye, how are you thinking about your personal brand? And, I was probably mid-stage in my career when someone said this to me, and it really stuck with me, and I had to think about it. That was something I wasn't being intentional about, right? And I had to take a moment and pause and think about, what do I want people to think about me or know about me when they meet, right? And And so your personal brand in terms of a professional situation is really, how do you want people to come away knowing about you, thinking about you? Right. And so it's being intentional about what are the 2 to 3 attributes that you want to be assigned to you as a personal brand. And so, like for me, I want people to know I'm an amazing growth marketer. It's something that I think I do well. I help businesses grow. Something that my husband said to me when he was talking to me about sports or something was that he was excited the Jazz were getting this coach, or I can't remember what, like personnel person. And he said, and I go, why are you so excited? And he's like, he's coming from this other coach's coaching tree. And anyone who comes out of his coaching tree is usually amazing. And, you know, that really stuck with me in the sense of, I want to be that. I want people to know that I'm not always going to have a role for great talent in their next step of their career. I realize that. And so while they work for me, I want to be able to develop great people into amazing marketers that, you know, creates an amazing coaching tree for me. And so for me, those are 2 of the big things that I want people to know is that, hey, Nye really helps companies grow. I get stuff done, and I'm an amazing manager and developer of people.
And how do you go about, you know, once you get to that point where you've kind of nailed, you know, like you said, those few attributes that you want people to know about you, how do you get that message? Like, how do you get that message out effectively? And also, on top of that, to what extent do you augment that brand with sort of the personal side, if that makes sense?
I might probably have a slightly different personal brand than I do professional brand. And you have to be conscious of when those relationships blend a little bit and how you want to act in certain ways. In terms of how to go about building that intentionality and creating that reputation, right? So in marketing, you figure out, how do you repeat yourself multiple times? How do people hear or see those things multiple times, right? In an interview for a candidate, most of the time people give you a layup there. What are your strengths? Well, here are some of my personal branding strengths. In an actual working environment, you're going to need to not only say it, but show it, right? If I'm saying that I get stuff done, I actually need to prove it and actually get things done. If I really help companies grow, I actually need to help the company grow, right? And do I really do a good job of managing people? Well, hopefully the people underneath me continue to develop and grow in their roles into better roles, either with the company or sometimes, unfortunately, not with the company, right? But they're always on an upward trajectory.
You make an interesting point. You touched on an interesting point here, which is, you know, personal branding is not just, okay, I'm looking for a job. Now I have to do, personal, professional branding.
It's who you are.
You could be happily, yeah. And you could be happily employed and very, but you should still think about how you're being perceived and, you know, what is your brand standing for, right? It's not just okay, I'm looking for a job now I need to turn this switch on personal branding, right? It sounds like something that you need to do and you should do just kind of as a function of who you are.
Well, and I once had a boss say this to me. We were about to get acquired by WeWork. And he said to me, he's like, you are now entering a really large company. Okay. And so to all the listeners who might be looking at a really large company, and in a really large company, your personal brand and that first impression means a lot, a big impact. You might shake the hand of one person who is going to have an opinion and influence in the room of whether or not you get a promotion. Right. And you might have only had one interaction with them. And so that personal brand, especially in a larger company where you don't have as much time to develop those relationships and things like that, sometimes can have bigger impact.
Yeah. First impressions, right? It's, Michelle and I, we go to networking events every now and then. And, it's always interesting when we meet folks and we ask them, oh, what are they working on or what do they do? And in fact, we went to a networking event not too long ago, and there was a gentleman that we spoke to, and he had 2 chances to kind of share with us what he was working on, what he does. and between Michelle and I, we couldn't figure it out what he did, and it was very we felt kind of bad because nobody's ever told him that hey, this doesn't make sense to a layperson. And if you can find a sounding board for someone that you could bounce off, here it is what I do. Do you understand it? Is it something that you can remember? It's almost like, being able to explain your personal brand to a sixth grader, 12-year-old or something like that. Because sometimes people get lost in the jargon, and if it's too convoluted, people will not remember it. Unless they happen to be in that specific industry and they or maybe in that role. Yeah.
Well, and you bring up a great point. Like, as a marketer, you got to know your audience. And in a personal branding situation, understand who you're talking to, what level, what is their knowledge and background, right? Oftentimes I have, I'll be at a parent event, gymnastics, for instance. Someone will sit next to me and talk to me, and they'll be like, oh, okay, what do you do? And I'm like, I keep it at certain levels depending on who they are. I don't know anything about them, so I'll just say I do marketing for a tech company, and I leave it at that. If they're in tech, what will they usually say? Oh, what kind of tech company? And then I can have a deeper level conversation, right? But if they have no idea, even in tech or something like that, then, that answer usually suffice.
Yeah. What do you call this? We call this progressive disclosure, right? You're not going to launch into a 10-minute soliloquy about all the nuanced details with all this jargon because you have no idea where they're coming from, or even if they're interested, right? Keep it simple. If they ask follow-up questions, go incrementally deeper and just keep it going, right? I love that. Want to kind of move over to sort of this next topic of sort of managing up and managing out with respect to your career and, how you're positioning yourself within an organization and what the value of that is. So now as you look at your career, as you look at how you've managed and built teams, and as you've looked at how you've managed your personal brand and, what are some of the things that you've done to sort of manage up, manage out, manage downward or whatnot?
So I'm not perfect at this by any means. I'm still a work in progress in all of this, but I was struggling at one point with one of my bosses, and I had a mentor. You should always have a mentor. They can help be a great sounding board for you. And I still have many today that I keep in touch with. But I had a mentor say to me, I was struggling with my boss and how to relate and how to connect with them and things like that. And they've finally said to me, based off of my description, they're like, well, how are you managing your boss? And it was such a foreign concept to me. And I was like, what do you mean, how am I managing my boss? And they're like, yeah, your boss is managing you, but how are you managing your boss's expectations of you, right? Are you actually communicating, hey, the realities of what you have on your plate? Your boss they can't read your mind, and you shouldn't assume that they know everything that you have going on, or that a good boss should, but it doesn't mean they do, right? And so how are you managing your time with them? How are you being productive in meetings with them? How are you making sure they're informed on things they should be informed by? And then also helping them understand the expectations, challenges, complications in your role, right? And maybe, like for me, maybe I've lost touch with how long something actually takes to build. And so my expectations are out of line, and I need to actually have someone explain that to me, right? And same thing. Sometimes I'm working with CEOs who really don't understand marketing. And so I have to take them through the journey of helping educate them on how long something realistically should take, right? And so it's helping set expectations from both sides. When I say managing out, you have your peers who have expectations of you, of what you're doing, right? And they all have opinions of you. And so how are you managing their opinions and expectations of you, and how you work together and collaborate, right? They want to be informed as well. Hey, don't just change a process that affected everything on my team, and now everything on my team's broken because you made a decision on a whim without consulting me, right? And so those are the ways that I think about how you have to manage up and out.
Yeah, so much of success is influenced by the expectations you set, right? And if no expectations, even if you do what you think to be a great job, if you're not setting any expectations, then the other folks don't know whether you came up or down or what the deal is. So, and I think a lot of this too can be applied in terms of folks that are going through the job seeking process, that are interviewing, and their ability to manage expectations with the folks that they have contact with. It's almost like a work sample, because you can get a sense of how somebody will manage your expectations based on how they conduct themselves as a candidate in an interview process. That's something we look for in terms of how they communicate with us. Do they keep their word when they say they're going to follow up or do this? And so, it's sort of a work sample, and it's not expressed, or it's not formal, but it's something that hiring managers and I know recruiters really look out for. So that's something that job seekers keep in mind.
And I like that concept of just managing up and out, because most people think of, I only manage down if I have a team. And so if they don't have any direct reports, they're not managing. But in reality, you do have to manage your relationships. You got to manage your peers. You got to manage the boss, or your manager above you. And, having that idea of managing up and out, it's so powerful, because people who are in their careers just don't think that way. And, going to your point, Eric, as well as about setting expectations, it is all about setting expectations, because the better communication, the better you can set expectations, then people can be aware of whether or not you're going to hit your target or not. And if you don't, at least you're setting your expectations, and you don't really get the fault of it as much, because you've communicated what you can and can't do.
Exactly. And I think that's the bigger thing, right? Everyone is different. And so if I mirrored everyone off of the way I was, then they would all, like you said, be very intentional and things like that. But not everyone's that way. And I think we all have to be able to give everyone grace, in that we're all different people. And that's also what we like about them, because they bring in different perspectives.
Yeah, there's this concept that, you're all familiar with, this idea of an API, right? And how computers or, software interacts with each other. People have APIs too. We don't call them APIs, but, if you can demonstrate or show people how they can best interact with you, and you can understand how to best interact with another person through their API, it can make the relationship much more effective in terms of setting expectations and what I need from you in order for me to give you what you need. That concept came up, I think I saw it on a post somewhere, but I thought it was a fascinating idea. And, you give people sort of the manual for how to interact with you. And, that's something that you keep yourself to. And if they keep themselves to, it could make the relationship much more effective. I know it's kind of reducing it to like computer talk, but I thought it was a
totally
fascinating
hear
concept.
you. And I go, I made the joke because I just did a team building event last week with my marketing team. And one of our sessions was on personalities and our personality test. And what do we take away from that, right? One, it helps everyone understand themselves a little bit better, but it also helps the rest of us working with you understand you a little bit better. And personality tests have been around forever. But the reality is any new team I join or ones that I run, I end up always doing a personality test still.
Yeah. Well, we're bumping up against time here, Nai. In closing, what's the best way that folks in our audience can connect with you and maybe learn more about some of the opportunities you might have?
So if you're in the job market, MedTrainer is hiring. Feel free to check out medtrainer.com. Our careers page will have our job postings. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me and reach out if you need something.
Awesome. Any parting advice for the folks in our audience today?
I would say, I know it feels hard and, difficult right now, the job market, but I do think people are hiring. They're just being more measured about their hiring process, right? And, case in point, I'm hiring because the person on my team is leaving to another role. She got a better opportunity. I'm super excited for her, but that's the reality, right? Is she was still able to go and find a job.
They're out there. A little bit tougher to come by, but they're out there. And so it's forcing us to really level up and be at the top of our game. So thanks, Nye. We appreciate your time. And I'm sure a lot of the folks out there will benefit from some of your insights here. So
yeah, thanks.
Anything else, Michelle?
No, I think I appreciate all, especially in the beginning, what you were sharing. I think that was super helpful and giving context to where you're at today. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Nye. Thank you, everyone out there.